Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Dear resource persons and participants, we are now in the fourth technical session of the conference, which is being organized by the Institute of Objective Studies, by University of Ibn Khaldun, Indonesia, and International Institute of Islamic Thought, USA, on personality and contribution of Dr. Mohammad Natsir as a national and international thought leader in 20th century. And in this fourth session, the theme is Dr. Natsir's contribution to promotion of Islamic thinking and his thoughts and methodologies, relevance to modern globalizing world. The session will be chaired by Dr. Sohireen Muhammad Salihin. Dr. Sohireen is Professor, Department of Quran and Sunnah Studies, International Islamic University, Malaysia. In this session, we are having very distinguished speakers, and the list is headed by one of the very prominent academic leaders of India, especially in the field of history, Professor Sayyid Jamaluddin. He was earlier with Jamia Millia Islamia, and he is now immensely participating in the endeavors of this Institute of Objective Studies. Then Professor Wasim Raja, again the Professor of History in Aligarh Muslim University, and Mr. Hilman Fikri Azman, and he is Executive Secretary Chairman, International Institute of Islamic Thought, Malaysia. Dr. Ajaz Ahmed, Assistant Professor, Department of Islamic Studies, AMU Aligarh. Dr. Sumaya Ahmed, Assistant Professor, Department of Islamic Studies, Alia University, Kolkata. And Dr. Nishad Afroz, Research Scholar, Department of Islamic Studies, Aligarh Muslim University. Miss Sana Naz, she is Research Scholar, Department of Islamic Studies, AMU Aligarh. And with this, I hand over the floor to the chairperson of the session, Dr. Sohireen Muhammad Salihin. Over to you, Dr. Sohireen.
It seems that Dr. Sohireen is not available.
If Dr. Sohireen is not available for the time being, I assume the responsibility of chairing the session, and I request Professor Dr. Sayyid Jamaluddin come forward and kindly make your presentation on the topic tracing how the Holy Quran inspired Mohammad Natsir. Over to you, Sayyid Jamaluddin.
Allah, most gracious, the most merciful, beginning in His name. Esteemed participants from Indonesia, organizers responsible for this two-day international conference, participants, and dear friends who are there as our online audience. Assalamu alaikum. As my topic has been mentioned to you, may I tell you first that it was on a very short notice that I prepared a brief paper which I'm going to present. And first, I would like to mention the works which I have consulted. Since my primary premise is that Dr. Mohammad Natsir, as he himself said, drew inspiration from Ayah 56 of Surah Al-Zariyat, which reads as وَمَا خَلَقْتَ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. So I thought that it will be appropriate that I take into consideration the commentaries of the Holy Quran which were there during the time when Dr. Mohammad Natsir was formulating his ideas. So in this connection, I first got the translation of a very authentic translation of Maulana Abdul Majid Daryabadi, then Abdullah Yusuf Ali's translation and commentary of the Holy Quran, and then Maulana Abul Ala Maududi's Tafhimul Quran, two translations, in fact, of two English translations of Tafhimul Quran. The first one, which came, had brief notes, but the other one has explanatory notes. So I have taken into consideration both these notes. And then I could get access only to a few writings in English on the subject I'm going to speak. That is Mamur Ilzamuddin's book, or rather thesis, Abul Ala Maududi and Mohammad Natsir's views on statehood, a comparative study. It was a master's thesis submitted to the McGill University long ago in 1995. Then I have consulted Ishaq Muhammad Shohaini and Sohireen Muhammad's book on integrated education, because I think that education was also closely associated with the kind of a state Dr. Mohammad Natsir had in his mind for Indonesia. And then another unpublished, there is another very valuable article, and I saw that the writer is there as our resource person, Dr. Kamal Hassan. His article, which appeared in the Muslim World in 2003, titled as The Influence of Maududi's Thoughts on Muslims in Southeast Asia, a Brief Survey. Then I have taken some facts or basic information from either Cambridge website or the Wikipedia, but very briefly I have relied on them, only for historical facts, not for interpretations. Mohammad Natsir, an intellectual and a statesman or rather an intellectual statesman, is best known for his writings on Islam and for his insistence that Islam must guide the destiny of the Republic of Indonesia. He had started writing on Islam long before he jumped into politics, and quite early in his life, in early 30s. And then he joined politics in the middle of 1930s. 45 books and hundreds of articles are from his pen, but unfortunately for us, we don't have access to all of his writings since they are in Indonesian language. Although he had good command over English, but his works are not there in English. For his views on Islamic policy, Natsir, as just said in the beginning, he derived inspiration from the Holy Quran. He himself once said that the verse 56 of Al-Zariyat was his source of inspiration, which is وَمَا خَلَقْتَ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. Maulana Abdul Majid Daryabadi's rendering is English rendering, and I have not created the jinn and mankind, but that they should worship me. But when we come to Abdullah Yusuf Ali, we come to know that he has broadened the meaning of this verse. His interpretation and his meaning of this verse is, I have only created jinns and man that they must serve me. So instead of worship me, here it is serve me. This would mean that it is the duty of all men and jinns to serve Allah so that He is pleased with their deeds. The commentary of this verse is also very interesting for us, for those who want to know what Dr. Mohammad Natsir must have understood by this and must have applied it to his politics. Quote from Abdullah Yusuf Ali's commentary: creation is not for idle sport or play. Allah has a serious purpose behind it, which in our imperfect state, we can only express by saying that each creature is given the chance of development and progress. Now that is what he had in his mind. Development towards the goal, which is Allah. Allah is the source and center of all power and goodness. And our progress depends upon our putting ourselves into accord with His will. This is another point to be noted. His will. We have to act according to His will. This is His service. These two things taken together would mean that this is His service. It's not of any benefit to Him. It is for our benefit, of course. Abdullah Yusuf Ali's English translation of the meaning of the Holy Quran appeared first in 1934. That is the period when Dr. Mohammad Natsir was writing in Indonesia. But I didn't find any evidence if he had access to Abdullah Yusuf Ali's translation. But since we know about his source of inspiration, we may presume that he must have read this. Since Muhammad Natsir and Maulana Sayyid Abul Ala Maududi were contemporaries and familiar with each other's religio-political thoughts, I would like to present here how the later how Maulana Maududi interpreted the verse 56 of Surah Al-Dariyah. His translation of the surah, of the ayah, is, I have not created the jinn and the man except for this, that they should worship me. So again, like Maulana Daryabadi, who wrote much later, he is also translating Abdun, he's translating Li'abudun as worship. But when we read his commentary, both brief commentary and the explanatory commentary, we find that he is very close to what Abdullah Yusuf Ali has written in his commentary of the verse. In the brief note, Maulana Maududi writes that this means, I have, quote, I have not created them, that is men and jinns, for the service of others, but for my own service. They should serve me, for I am their creator. When no one else has created them, no one else has the right that they should serve him. And how can it be admissible for them that they should serve others instead of me, their creator? So this is God's sovereignty Maulana Maududi is talking about. Then in the larger commentary, Maulana Maududi reflects on the significance of this verse. He writes, quote, here the question arises that Allah Almighty is not the creator only of the jinn and man, but of the entire universe and of everything in it. Then why has it been said only about the jinn and man that he has not created them for the service of others but of himself? Whereas every single creature is there to serve Allah. The answer is, on the earth, only the jinn and man have been granted the freedom that they may serve Allah within their sphere of choice, if they so like. Otherwise, they can turn away from Allah's service as well as serve others beside him. The rest of the creatures in this world do not have this kind of freedom. They do not have any choice whatever that they may not worship and serve Allah or may serve any other. Therefore, only about the jinn and man, it has been said here that by turning away from the obedience and servitude of their creator within the bounds of their own option and choice, and by serving others than the creator, they are fighting their own nature. They should know that they have not been created for the service of any other but the creator. And for them, the right way is that they should not abuse the freedom granted them, but within the bounds of this freedom also, they should serve God voluntarily, just as every particle of their body is serving him involuntarily in the sphere where they have not been granted any freedom. Maulana Maududi adds, the word ibadat in this verse has not been used in the sense of only prayer, fasting and other kinds of such worship, so that one may understand that the jinn and men have been created only for performing the prayer, observing the fast, and for praising and glorifying Allah. Although this sense is included in it, this is not its complete sense. Its complete sense is that the jinn and man have not been created for the worship, obedience, and carrying out of the orders of any other but Allah. They are not there to bow to any other, to carry out the orders of any other, to live in fear of any other, to follow the religion enjoined by any other, to look upon any other as the maker and destroyer of one's destiny, and to supplicate any other than Allah for help. Now, this is what I regard the basic premise of Dr. Mohammad Natsir's politics. As a politician, Natsir aimed to ensure that the Muslim community lived in a state where Islamic teachings, according to Mamur Ilzamuddin, is teachings apply in the life of individual, society, and the state of the Republic of Indonesia. He also worked for human rights and aimed to achieve the modernization of Islam. It is here that we find Dr. Mohammad Natsir was different from Maulana Maududi, that he aimed at the modernization of Islam. It should be noted here that Mamur has tried to compare Nasir's political views with those of Maulana Maududi in his Master of Arts thesis. I could not get access to this. However, I gather from the title that Mamur might have found similarity in the political thought of Maududi and Natsir. One striking resemblance between them is that both of them developed their ideas in 1930s. Despite differences in culture, the two Islamic thinkers were familiar with each other's religio-political thoughts. In making Medinas in the East, Islamist connections and progressive Islam, Taranjit Sevia explains how the meeting and subsequent interaction of Maulana Maududi and Mohammad Natsir created Medina in Pakistan and Indonesia. Medina here means the Republic of Medina, created by the Prophet ﷺ. The contemporary Islamic thinkers lived, and the two contemporary Islamic thinkers, that is Maulana Maududi and Mohammad Natsir, they lived at one and the same time. I am given a notice that the time is over. I hope that when the proceedings are published, you may get a revised version of this paper. Only a few sentences I would like to read from the as a national leader and intellectual of great class, Mohammad Natsir's role in building the Republic of Indonesia and bringing Islamic political ideas in the forefront will always be remembered. His political views, inspired by the Holy Quran and the Sharia, which can be traced in the political philosophy of another 20th century Muslim philosopher and reformer from South Asia, Maulana Maududi. This can be seen as a unique example of interaction between the two Islamic thinkers of South Asia and Southeast Asia. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. I would request the chairperson, Professor Dr. Soireen, that you are the chairperson for the session, and I can just assist you in coordinating. And now that was Professor Sayyid Jamaluddin, who spoke on tracing how the Holy Quran inspired Mohammad Natsir. And now we are having with us Mr. Hilman Fikri Azman. He is Executive Secretary to Chairman, International Institute of Islamic Thought, Malaysia. And he'll speak on Mohammad Natsir, disentangling issues in contemporary Islamic thought. Over to you, Mr. Hilman Fikri Azman.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh. Alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa mawalah. Thank you very much to the organizer. Alhamdulillah, we have passed several sessions, and yesterday it was very intriguing, and the session is, I believe, successful. We managed to see the participation of so many people from all over around the world. And so today I'll be presenting a topic on Mohammad Natsir, but with a slight difference because we want to focus on his intellectual thought. Now, Mohammad Natsir is widely known as a Muslim Democrat. Not so many political figure nowadays are dubbed with the title Muslim Democrat. But upon further research and investigation of his ideas and thought, it is proven that Mohammad Natsir actually discussed a lot of issues, contemporary issues in Islamic thought, and particularly in history, in kalam, in philosophy, in aesthetics, and language, and even in arts. So I think it is very timely in this conference, and I believe yesterday, February the 6th, is the day of his departure. So it is very timely for us to look at other dimensions of his thought. Now, I have highlighted or selected 7 themes for us to look into. The first one is on education and the responsibility of the enlightened, which means the intellectuals and scholars. And the second one is on rationalism, on living with reason alone. Mohammad Natsir has written at length about Mu'tazilites and quoting instances from the West, especially scholars who are bereft from spirituality and focusing on reason alone, and how can they cope with this. So Mohammad Natsir discussed this at length. And then we look into the essence of civilization, and also the originality of Islamic civilization. And in this discussion, he tried to debunk some of the perceptions and criticisms thrown by some Orientalists and Western scholars on the unoriginality of Islamic civilization. So in this theme, he tries to outline why Islamic civilization in history, and particularly referring to the Abbasid period, is actually an original one. And then we look into the question of custom or adah. As we know, Mohammad Natsir is from Minangkabau family. And a lot of other Indonesian scholars like Hamka or maybe Agus Salim has discussed about the question of custom. But as has been pointed out by, if I'm not mistaken, Audrey Kahin, Mohammad Natsir does not regularly discuss about the problem of custom. But in one section in Capita Selecta, he discussed this, and we'll look into that. And the 7th one is on language and national development. I will start with the first one on education. As we all know, Mohammad Natsir, upon graduating from school, he was offered to go into a prestigious Dutch school, but he turned down the offer and the scholarship to go there because he felt that his heart is for the activism and to help the people, Indonesian, in fighting against the colonial power at that time, Dutch, and subsequently the Japanese invasion. But education somehow is very central to Natsir's struggles. A corrupt education system will never beget a successful and independent nation. And that only after the reform of education will the nation thrive and be able to compete with other nations. So since a good education is very important, Mohammad Natsir emphasizes on the education of philosophy, critical thinking, and creative thinking. So he said, philosophy should be taught to, at that time, Indonesians, because despite its difficulty, it is the responsibility of the enlightened to convey philosophical ideas and critical thinking, its methodologies, to fellow Indonesians and its people with the way that is appealing to them. And for that reason, he eulogized Ibn Tufail's Hayy ibn Yaqzan, whereby in the novel of Hayy ibn Yaqzan, Ibn Tufail tried to deliver a philosophical ideas on epistemology, on empiricism and rationalism to the people of his time, but using a novel, using an analogy. So for Natsir, this is a good example of how the enlightened discharge with their responsibilities, all right? And then this is, if you are familiar with Ibn Rushd, Faslul Maqals, this is actually quite the same ideas that have been emphasized in Faslul Maqal, whereby Ibn Rushd outlined 3 levels of people, and for each levels there are certain specific ways to cope with them and to deliver our message. And the second one, on rationalism, in this theme or in this problem, Mohammad Natsir brings the tragic life of Paul Ehrenfest, a renowned physician, but not as popular as Einstein or Niels Bohr or his contemporaries. But one of the dark history of Paul Ehrenfest that not many known is that towards the end of his life, he shot dead his son, Wasik, and also commit suicide. And well, throughout his life, he was known to be a very rational person. He considers knowledge and reason to be above everything. But there is some loopholes in his pursuit of knowledge, which is he neglect the spirituality or the inner dimension of a human life, and therefore he felt not content and felt somehow empty, or his life is meaningless. And for that reason, he shot dead his son and commit suicide after that. In this instance, Mohammad Natsir highlighted that despite your perseverance and your commitment to pursue knowledge and scholarship, if you neglect an important, essential dimension of a human being, which is the spiritual part, you are condemned to death in a horrendous way, of course. So that's why Mohammad Natsir said, we need to satisfy our dimensions equally. We have sensational part, we have rational part, and we have the spiritual part. We cannot somehow neglect one aspect and focus only one aspect and expect stability in life. That's why, and he also in another chapter in his Capita Selecta pointed out about Al-Ghazali's dilemma, which has been outlined by Al-Ghazali himself in his Al-Munqidh min al-Dalal, the deliverance from error, in which Al-Ghazali doubts his own reason and saying that, in conclusion, reason alone could not bring happiness to one's life, and that it's insufficient to reach certitude, in fact. And because knowledge, especially in science, of which the discipline that Paul Ehrenfest dealing throughout his life, is constantly developing and changing. Yesterday, we are taught that the atom is the the basis of our life. But then tomorrow we are taught that in atom itself, there is a slight more smaller particles, quarks, they say, and it doesn't end there. And science constantly develop. And so Natsir said, you cannot depend on science and reason alone. And because that will not brings you to certitude. And then he also discussed on civilization. And as we know, a famous work that he quoted in his Capital Selector is Henry Pirren's Mohammad Natsir. I believe this has been touched by Datuk Sri Anwar Ibrahim yesterday in his inaugural address, in which Mohammad Natsir emphasizes the inner dimension of a civilization, for a civilization to be regarded as a civilization. Because previously, Edward Gibbon in his The History of the Decline and Fall of Roman Empire claimed that the beginning of the Middle Ages started with the fall of the Roman office, with the invasion of the Germanic tribes. But then Henry Pirren said, this is not necessarily the case, because even after the Germanic tribes invaded the Roman Empire around Mediterranean Sea, they still practiced the Roman way of life. The economic activities of the Roman continued. So it could not be seen as a new era. So what is the new era? Henry Pirren said it started with the Arab invasion of the Mediterranean seas, of the region around that, in the 8th century. Because during that time, the economic activities of the Romans are severed. Ties are cut, and things flows out from the Roman region, but nothing comes back. And also we are known, we are familiar with the word mozarab, in whereby non-Arabs who determine or who speaks and practice Arabic culture, because they are heavily influenced by the Arabic government at that time. So they practice the culture of Arabs or Muslims. They wear jubba and they speak Arabic, even though they are from Spain, Al-Andalus, and in some part of Portugal. And so in the essence of civilization, Mohammad Natsir pointed out that Pirren has demonstrated the primacy of the religious dimension of inner strength and culture of a civilization over its external sensible dimension. So this inner dimension serves as culturele functie, the Dutch word for cultural force, is what distinguishes humans from animals, because it gives humans its functional role in developing a civilization. What Malik bin Nabi would coin as idea force, the driving idea that brought societies springing out from nothingness to be projected onto historical scenes. And then, so we go to the originality of Islamic civilization. So there are half-baked remarks from superficial observations over noticeable similarities between the Islamic civilization and the Western civilization, particularly the ancient Greek civilization. But then Mohammad Natsir is very clever. He quipped the anecdotal conversation between the silver-tongued priest and Mark Twain in an instance where Mark Twain argued that the originality of the silver-tongued priest is actually duplicated. Every single word of his speech is duplicated from a book which is in the possession of Mark Twain. So, of course, the priest becomes angry. But then, upon revelation of the book, we are we know that the book is actually a dictionary. So Mohammad Natsir, referring to this anecdote, saying that despite the noticeable similarities between the two different civilizations, that does not mean that one influenced the other, and that does not mean that the Islamic civilization is a copycat. So this is a very important point where Natsir cited Ibn al-Haytham as one of the original scientists who made some of the earliest advancements in the field of optics and even corrected some optical theories from his predecessors. So despite that, the chief contribution of Islamic civilization to humanity is not merely scientific discoveries, as what we all know in the Islamic golden ages, but these are, according to Natsir, these are its fruits. The spirit of research and critical thinking, as emphasized in the Quran, and later on repeated by Jabir ibn Hayyan, is the ultimate contribution of Islamic civilization to the rest of humanity. And of course, any efforts to revive such spirit of research and critical thinking must not be obstructed by any political power out of fear. Rather, they should be embraced and given due recognition as they serve as the seeds of civilization. And then, so that's on civilization. Now on custom, we are now at the 5th point before I end. At a young age, we know that Mohammad Natsir is very much exposed to the culture of Minangkabau. However, as noticed by Yusril Izzah Mahendra, Indonesian scholar, he rarely touched upon the cultural polemics with Islamic teachings in his speeches and writings. This is unlike other Minangkabau scholars like Hamka and previously Agus Salim, who have extensively discussed the polemics publicly in various places. So nonetheless, in 2 essays Mohammad Natsir published, which was later compiled into his Capita Selecta, he discussed about the question of fara'id, the inheritance laws, which in some points contradicted with the Minangkabau culture and custom. So according to Natsir, first off, he started with the premise that a society with an age-old tradition is a mature and culturally rich society. When a custom becomes part of generational tradition, there shall be elements of it which, due to its relative nature, stood in conflict with the constantly evolving contemporary society. So in facing threat of its decay, some segments in society will rise to its defense to prevent it from being devoured by the novelties of modernity. But Mohammad Natsir emphasizes that it is not wise to force the contemporary society to accept a custom that no longer suits the current context of their milieu. So such acts will rupture the tradition from its essential feature of flexibility. This is important because usually people discuss custom as something which is fixed and unchanged, but Natsir believes each custom has the flexible elements in it, which can be changed in accordance with its context. So it is mandatory for the custom in question to be prevalent at the time the transaction or the activities is conducted. This is in line with the methodology in Sharia, al-'adatul muhakkama, in which the custom must be prevalent in a society when the transaction is being done. Okay, and so he criticized some of the Minangkabau custom which he believed to be in contradiction with the Islamic teachings, or a rather reasonable practices such as the practice of prioritizing wali adat, the custom-based guardian, over wali shar'i or wali shara', the religiously sanctioned guardian. the prohibition of marrying someone from outside one's village. This is the custom. And the practice of making the mother to the husband's residence as the real home, while the house that one lives with one spouse is considered as a temporary place to stop by. This is also to Natsir an ill custom which should be forsaken. But he does not aim to abolish or discredit the role of custom and tradition. Their importance is manifested to the point that religious scholars are required to understand it. For without such understanding, a scholar will not be able to comprehend the real situation of the people of their time and will be unable to build a bridge between the society and themselves. But he believed culture needs to be suited with the context of the society. And last but not least, on language, this is, I think, also an important contribution to the language literature and emphasis on national language. Natsir believed that the intellectual foundation of any nation in the world that determines its progress and regress in history lies within the state of its own mother tongue. Native language forms an essential part of the nation's culture and identity. Language and thought are indispensable from each other as they are structurally intertwined. And since language is the root of a culture, therefore, to defend one's own native language is equivalent to defending one's own culture. So, for example, in history, when the native language of Indonesians was sidelined during the Dutch colonialism and later the Japanese occupation, Natsir was entrusted with the educational curriculum, stressed that he would ensure that the schools were infused with an Indonesian, not a Japanese spirit, and he resisted further efforts at Japanization. So, as he affirmed that language must constantly develop abreast of new knowledge. Language must constantly develop abreast of new knowledge, and because limitation of knowledge and vocabularies will limit the growth and the breadth of thinking and thought of a nation.
Okay, Mr. Fikri, now the time is over.
Okay. And last but not least, my last point is on aesthetics. Because Natsir believed any art needs to have suggestive force.
You said earlier also the last point. So is it the last point or?
Sorry. Yep. Okay. Because art is built upon the premise that any explicit suggestion or order might not be as effective as when it is implicit. So the French slogan, l'art pour l'art, the art for art, is for Natsir, does not reflect the raison d'etre of an art, because an art should be used and utilized to mobilize change, to deliver message and ideas, to catalyze reform. Art for an art is merely a sensible culture or sensational culture which does not address its real essential reason for an art to be produced, which is to deliver message. So he pointed out some examples, and we can see, for example, like a novel in Indonesia, Max Havelaar, is considered to be the book that killed colonialism, as dubbed by Pramodia Ananta Tour, because the book of Max Havelaar was written by Multatuli in the 19th century, describes about the horror and horrendous colonialism of the Dutch upon the Indonesian nationals. They were oppressed, they were given low wages, and some of them were even killed. So this book which reveals this catastrophe to the Western world, give pressure to the Dutch to stop and end their occupation. So this is an example of an art which has a strong message and ideas, and that serves as a catalyst to change and reform. And I think that's all. Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Fikri. I wish you to be a doctor soon. And then now we are having with us Dr. Ajaz Ahmed. He is in Department of Islamic Studies, Aligarh Muslim University, and he'll speak on Islamic educational thought of Mohammad Natsir. Dr. Ajaz.
Yes, sir. Assalamu alaikum. I'm audible?
Rahmatullah.
Yes. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh to all audience, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I am very much thankful to the organizers who give me a chance to present a paper on this hidden hero of Malaysia of 20th century. The topic of my paper is a study on Islamic educational thoughts of Mohammad Natsir. Various scientific papers, dissertations, theses, much have been discussed about Mohammad Natsir's thought on political and constitutional themes. A very few have been found written on his educational thought. So therefore, I wrote to recite on his educational thought, or we can say Islamic philosophy, educational philosophy of Mohammad Natsir. Along with this, I have covered his life, education, his career, his academic activities, his awards and degrees. In writing this paper, I have gone through those sources which were available only in English. Sources like articles and books that discuss directly or indirectly the thoughts of Mohammad Natsir. But due to some time bound, I will speak on Mohammad Natsir's concept of integration of Islamic education. Mohammad Natsir was one of the prominent and important Muslim intellectuals, legendary figures, thinkers, and reformers of Indonesia of 20th century. Mohammad Natsir was also called as Mujahid-e-Kabir by King Faisal of Saudi Arabia. He was also known by the title Dasuk Tinaru Panjang. Mohammad Natsir has served the first Prime Minister during the reign of Sukarno. He has assumed an important position in the largest Islamic party, Maisomi, of Malaysia. In 1938, he joined the Indonesian Islamic Party, PII, and from 1940 to 1942, he had been working as the head of the Bandung branch. He had served as the head of Education Bureau of Bandung till 1945. Mohammad Natsir has held the position as Vice President of Islamic Mu'tamar and the Chairman of Board of Dawa Islami Indonesia from 1967 to 1993 till his death. He was one of the top figures of Rabta-e-Alam Islami. During the Japanese occupation, Mohammad Natsir served as Chief of Bureau of Islamic Education in Bandung. Shortly after independence, Sukarno appointed him Information Minister in the first cabinet of Indonesia. However, he resigned from his post in April 26, 1951 because of disagreement with Sukarno on the policies of secular policies of Mustafa Kemal. Mohammad Natsir criticized Sukarno that he is less concerned with the welfare outside Java. Natsir also known several languages: English, Dutch, French, German, Arabic. Now we come to his views on Western education. We left all his life and his achievements. Mohammad Natsir was very much concerned about the influence of Western education on the young generation. Mohammad Natsir felt that the Western education focused only on the material aspect, which gives the birth of alien ideas that contradicted with the divine message. Mohammad Natsir, dissatisfied with the Western education system, but he want to teach. Hello. हाँ जी जी. But he want to teach secular subjects such as psychology, sociology, and even Western philosophical thought. He further praised the effectiveness of Western education to train the youth in technological knowledge and skill. Mohammad Natsir emphasized that Western sources should not be rejected because Islam encourages scholars to cross-check the concept of truth regardless of cultural and religious boundaries that they are in. He also gave the examples of Muslim scholars and scientists of the golden period who thoroughly studied the philosophies and other theories and concept sciences that were developed by Plato, Socrates, and Ptolemy. And these Muslim scholars exerted their energies and thoughts to come up with a new invention and various fields. His concept of integration of knowledge. Mohammad Natsir's idea of integration of education was particularly a response to the call of ijtihad as viewed by his mentor, Ahmed Hassan. According to Mohammad Natsir, the development of Ummah can only be achieved through proper planning of education. For this purpose, he sought to apply a comprehensive methodology that could produce students who are well equipped with religious values and worldly knowledge. According to Mohammad Natsir, in the Western education system, along with these sciences, religious subjects should be offered to equip the student with the mission of dedicating their knowledge to gain God's pleasure and avoid blind imitation. Mohammad Natsir was concerned about the comprehensiveness of Sharia, which had to be taught to the youth. Apparently, his idea of serving the Ummah through education could be linked to the reformist thought of Jamaluddin Afghani, Muhammad Abduh, Rashid Riza, and Hassan al-Banna. He paid much emphasis to educating the youth because, in his opinion, education is the cornerstone of a building to determine the progress of the nation. He gave the examples of Japan as one of the Eastern countries which had achieved good progress in the field of science and technology and attracted people from all over the world simply because of its leader who focused their attention seriously to educating their youth. It is quite obvious that the idea of Islamic education in the hands of Mohammad Natsir was intended to save future generations from secular influence. Mohammad Natsir used integration of education as one of the elements in producing new systems. Mohammad Natsir proposed that the integrated education should be started from the pre-university level because he wanted to eliminate the negative image of Islamic education, which was given in the traditional Islamic boarding schools of Indonesia known as pesantren. As far as the religious subjects are concerned, Mohammad Natsir encouraged his youth to use analytical thinking instead of memorizing Quranic texts. Students were also encouraged learning to play piano and were also obliged to compose songs to perform at the annual drama or musical performance. Such emphasis attempted to demonstrate a new model of education which could produce graduates who were well motivated by religious morality and competent in worldly sciences. For Muhammad Natsir, the main objective of education in Islam is to serve Allah. Education should not be disconnected from the concept of Tawheed, which represents the bedrock of Islam. It is the source of freedom and spiritual power to attain progress and happiness, both in this world and in the hereafter. He described that the purpose of education is to produce generation who will dedicate their lives for the cause of Allah. For Natsir, education is not create a person who is competent in this field for his own sake. Rather, it should be created to serve the needs of the people in the community. He explained that purpose of education cannot be separated from the mission in his life in this world. Mohammad Natsir believed that education should be used to promote justice and to eradicate evil practices from the community. Thus, education in Islam should comply with the real objectives of life or become fruitless. Ultimately, the objective of education should be in response to the divine call, which says, I have only created jinns and man that they may serve me. In this particular aspect, education is closely related to commitment of a person to dedicate his life to an ideal, cooperate with others. The goal of education in reality cannot be separated from the objective of life. So I will conclude my paper, sir. Mohammad Natsir believed that the main problem. Hello. Mohammad Natsir believed that main problem to overcome backwardness in the Islamic education is to overhaul the way of the curriculum, that is dichotomous system between religious knowledge and general knowledge toward the integrated curriculum. So he regarded education as the only tool to drive their Muslim Ummah from its backwardness. The objective of integrated Islamic education is to produce graduates who have a balance between intellectualism and religious commitment. Regarding the quality and benefit of education, Mohammad Natsir did not make any distinction related to the goodness of education, whether it comes from Islam or it comes from the West. From him, the Muslim world and the West gave complementary contribution to the humanity, and thus those who totally undermined the Western system of education were narrow-minded. The so-called integrated Islamic education should not heavily emphasize on the spiritual aspect while ignoring the signification of worldly knowledge. Nevertheless, this theory of integrated Islamic education aims to provide students with an enhanced educational experience, empowering them with knowledge to effect positive change to themselves and the society. His theory encapsulates the idea of the right balance of integrated knowledge, which seeks to produce a harmonious and tolerant society for nation building and progress. Once again, I am very much thankful to provide me a chance to know that a great personality of Indonesia. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Agaz. And the best was you kept the time yourselves. Now we have with us Dr. Sumaya Ahmed, also Assistant Professor, Department of Islamic Studies, University, Kolkata. The topic is Dr. Mohammad Natsir, Contribution to Islamic Literary Works. Dr. Sumaya Ahmed, over to you.
Highly respected chairperson of the session, delegates, speaker, and my dear brother and sister, Assalamu alaikum. First of all, thanks to Allah, and then thanks to Institute of Objective Studies and University of Khaldun providing me the opportunity to present a paper. The title of my paper is Dr. Mohammad Natsir, Contribution to Islamic Literary Works. Martius Gufran says, quote, how difficult to understand and the history of the struggle of Indonesian nation without knowing Natsir, unquote. Mohammad Natsir, simple and outstanding personality and resilient character, and the national aspirations he advocate had elevated is a superior maestro, a pious and respected mujahid, a democratic and nationalist to proclaim the nation. So this paper attempt to examine the Mohammad Natsir works and especially highlights his contribution to Islamic literary works. The next, first point, the introduction, the Muhammad Natsir voluminous writing cover a broad range of issues, but central to his work is a concern with the formal establishment of Islamic symbol and institution within all the aspects of Indonesian public life. A survey of his statement and define the way and the community for modern Indonesian Muslim reveals how this influential figure came to define the communal boundaries and the proper models of behavior in ways that were to have